Hey, welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. Today on the show, I want to talk about a conversation I had with my 93-year-old grandfather and his outlook, not only in terms of his history, what he's seen in 93 years on this beautiful earth of ours. He'll actually be 94 in November, but also some of the concepts that he has taught me about money in particular. But before we get started, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. Now, before we get started on today's show, I should say that I speak with my grandfather every week. In fact, we've been talking every week for most of my life. I mean, I actually had a conversation with him recently, particularly around legacy planning and discussions of really how we view our daily lives in concert with our overall lifespan. And I'm very fortunate and lucky to be able to speak to my grandfather as much as I do. And when I talk about lifespan, really what I mean is the kind of the lifespan God gives us here on earth. And again, I talk with him about money in all different types of discussions. And, I talk about business. I started off the conversation the other day I had with him with a very simple question. And I thought it'd be really good to bring that onto a show for all of us today. And my question was this: what is different? I call him Pa John, my grandfather. What is different, Pa John, about money to you now that you are 93 years old versus when you were 18? His response was, well, Bradley, at 18, I didn't have enough money to think about money. Now pause for a second and think about that for a second, right? I mean, that was an interesting statement for someone. I'm talking about 80 years ago, right? And what was interesting about that was right on the heels of that comment, he also said, but it didn't really matter to me. Then he said this: all I know was this: I may not have had money, but I had everything I needed. And this is where I bring up the concept of living life out of abundance versus scarcity. I bring this up a lot on our show. And think about that. When you don't have it, you don't really think about it. And then you get to the concept of all of a sudden you start having it, and then you start stressing about it, obsessing over it maybe even, right? And anyone else ever thought that? I know I have. I mean, the whole idea of the more you have to fall concept is right there. It's right in the bedrock of this statement. And it's crazy, and I've said this a lot, that when a decision is to be made, when the conversation is should you versus could you, I mean, they're very different if you think about that. And this is what I mean, okay? Take my grandfather, 18 years old, didn't have any money or anything, right? It's a really simple question. If you were to come up to him at that point and say, hey, let's go on vacation, as an example, something we talk about all the time here on our show. We have this luxurious world that we get to live in because of men like my grandfather and many grandfathers out there that, like many of you listening, we owe a lot to this generation. But my point here is it's very simple for him at that stage of his life to be like, no, it's not even a thought. I can't go on vacation. I can't afford it. It's not even, I don't have to think about it twice. There's no thought in it because he couldn't. It wasn't even an option. Now, what I mean when all of a sudden you start growing and having assets and have means, let's say, now all of a sudden it's like, well, we could. And then we start talking about, okay, if we could, then should we? You see what I'm saying here? The stress that we bring on in our lives when it comes to something particular like money has a lot to do with the question and how we start that question. Should you versus could you? Now, any one of us right now could think of a time period in our life where we were living paycheck to paycheck or in debt, or maybe we're there right now. So my speaking weekly here on our show and with our clients is a lot about the psychology and the mindset of how we view our money versus money itself. It's a very different context. So my next question to my grandfather really came organically from this first question and our conversation around what would you tell a younger person today? And he said, Bradley, it's hard to say in today's world, but I'll say this: take a job, do the best you can, and make it matter, make it count. These are his words. Work those hours. Don't look over the fence. These are all words from him on my notes. And then I started asking him, I said, okay, about his career a little bit. And he goes on and he goes, when I look back on my 35 years as a civilian contractor in logistics for the military, and then his 6 years previous to that in the Army, there were decades sometimes where I was working and I would really not get promoted. But you know what, he said? My grandfather, by the way, he's debt-free. He's been debt-free for most of my life, right? Has a lot of assets in the bank, not because he's driving a Ferrari or living in mansions. Trust me, no. He's doing it because he built his own little empire. Whatever that number means to whatever person's listening or watching right now. I've shared this a lot. In fact, I just spoke about this whole rich versus wealthy concept on our show a week or two ago. And the difference in those two words and the vernacular behind them, I've always said this, has a lot to do with where you put the zeros. And in his world, his zeros were having zero regrets. He worked hard, he raised a family, he lived in areas where he wanted to live in, but he kept his head down. And I know many of us have had this conversation with people, and we know this from a lot of our generations, but like nowadays more than ever, if you are under the age of say 30 or 40 in particular, I want to be very clear about this. You have more noise around you than that generation did. I told my grandfather this and he said, I totally agree. I mean, the noise we have from social media, the noise we have from media outlets in general, and really the culture nowadays is really about looking over the fence, kind of like what's better, what's greater, what am I not doing well, and what's this random influencer telling me I'm not doing well, right? And I mentioned this to my grandfather and he said, I agree. The grass is always greener where you mow it, is what he said. I don't think the younger generation has ever been given so much than they are today. That was his following quote. I don't think this generation right now, in any generation in US history, has ever been given as much as they are today. Now, back in my day, he was saying, we weren't given anything. You had to work for it. You likely all heard this, the whole, back in my day, I had to walk a mile to school kind of stuff, right? But that's true. You had to earn it. Friends, we're gonna miss this generation. I shared this today because I get to talk to him every week and I'm so blessed. And he's a very, very close family member of mine. I love him dearly. And I guess I would say this real quick aside, if you have family members like this, a colleague, a mentor, reach out to them. If not for you, for them. But it's amazing what you can get from those conversations. So find those loved ones, talk to them, ask them their story. It's fascinating. Now I'll end with this. The largest generational shift in wealth is about to happen. And it's currently happening, by the way, over the next the next 5, 10, and 15 years. This generation that is going to be passing on, basically those born in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s even, and leaving this wealth to this next generation who sadly, psychology speaking really, hasn't really quote unquote earned it, might squander it. Now, this is, to me, friends, is why something I speak about heavily, and I'm very purposeful on this topic. That's the reason really for this show, the impetus of why I wanted to do this over the past couple years. You know, when and if you receive these dollars from inheritance or things like that, I promise you it's something that hits different. You know what I mean by that? It's not something you earned. And this is okay. This is okay to be candid and honest about this, all right? I'm not trying to, poo-poo what's gonna happen or this blessing that's coming to you. By no means, no. What I'm sharing is this. It's a difference between something you've earned versus something you were given. And that's a blessing. And that's what, by the way, this generation wants to do. They want to give it. But we need to treat it a little bit differently because we look at money that we've earned differently than what we've been given. I've seen it tried and true in my 20 years as an advisor. Wouldn't you agree? We talk about money all the time on this show, right? We talk about savings, we talk about investing, we talk about taxes, all those kinds of things. And they matter, don't get me wrong. He even said so too, they matter. Because when and if you do receive money from this inheritance, you'll want to know what to do with it, to be a good steward with it. And that's where, friends, an advisor comes in, someone you can build trust with to help steward the blessings you're receiving, but also your grandfather, your grandmother, your family, your parents might want you to do with it. So talk with an advisor, meet with them, because likely they have experience to help you navigate these uncharted waters. Lastly, I want to ask you this. Do you have everything you need? Are you healthy? Thank God for that. Do you have a roof over your head? Thank God for that. Do you have a job? Thank God for that. It's amazing when we start doing that, even a simple 30 seconds of just being grateful. It's amazing how it can actually ease the stress of our day. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode today. If you did, give it a like, be sure to subscribe, and always remember to make your money matter.